LeighTDickey.com. Well, hello everybody, Leigh Dickey here. Welcome to another episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. Today, this week on the Beats and Speaks podcast, we make history, or I make history, as I interview my first guest ever on this show, and his name is Marco Attanasi. Now, who he is a self-professed former, I suppose, compulsive liar, you could say. From the interview, he told me that he used to make up stories and, I suppose, lies and just project that to other people and give people that as fact. So we talk about that, what it was like for him growing up an only child with a single mom. We shoot the breeze, talk about what it was like growing up in the 90s, some martial arts, video games like Pokemon, the TV show too, and the Super Nintendo. All good fun. I want to thank Marco for coming on the show. It was a ton of fun just to have him on. And if you yourself would like to be a guest on the Beats and Speaks podcast, email me at leightdickey@gmail.com. That's LEIGHTDICKEY@gmail.com. All that information will be in the description below. And of course, you can find the Beats and Speaks podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube by searching Leigh Dickey TV, and wherever you get your podcasts. And new episodes of the Beats and Speaks podcast are released every Friday at midnight Eastern Time. But now that all that housekeeping is out of the way, let's get right into the interview with me and Marco Attanasi right here, right now on the Beats and Speaks podcast. First off, welcome to the Beats and Speaks podcast, and thank you for agreeing to do this. I appreciate it very much. So I'm looking through some notes here, and it says that you were obviously a single child, like an only child raised by a single mom. What was that like for you?
For me, it was great. I mean, it was the only thing that I really knew. Growing up, I knew that, I obviously knew that people had two parents. I didn't really meet anybody with just a single parent. But I mean, my mom and I had a blast. I have very fond memories of us playing, I think it was the Super Nintendo, Donkey Kong Country and stuff like that.
Nice.
Yeah. It was great. Like times were tough, financially speaking, but, being the person that she is, she really did her best to make sure that I didn't feel left out from my other friends, I guess, with two parents. She always made sure that I had the latest and greatest tech. And, when the Game Boy Color came out, I had that right away. And overall, it was a really good experience.
So it seems like you were a bit of a gamer when you were younger. Can I ask how old you were?
Currently, I'm 26.
Oh, you're younger than me. So you said that your mom kept you in, made sure you had the latest and greatest techs, and you mentioned that you had like the Game Boy and the Super Nintendo. Do you have a favorite game at all?
You know what? Not anymore. I mean, if you asked me like 10 years ago, I would have said my favorite game was probably Pokemon Yellow.
Nice.
Yeah.
I remember, because I'm 30, and I remember as a kid, like, that being the biggest thing. I didn't know anything about like Japanese animation or Japanese anime whatsoever. And then once like Pokemon and things like that came over here, it was just, I sort of was enthralled in that whole thing. I'm assuming it kind of like swallowed you whole a little bit too.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, like back in the day, like before the internet, like, my friends and I would just kind of go out to the park and try and trade Pokemon on those crazy like link up cables and stuff. And we were just totally immersed. I remember even going to like summer camp and like wanting to do nothing but play Pokemon. So I was pretty into it.
Fair. Like that's the typical 90s kid answer. That's perfect.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So it says like I see here that you were bullied like up until the 10th grade. Is there any particular reason why you think that, like what made you a target? Like why were you sort of bullied and why you were a target at all?
Honestly, a number of reasons. To start, I've always been a bit of an introvert. And I guess being an only child with a single mom, that kind of, maybe a little bit of DNA too, but certainly my environment played a huge part in, becoming an introvert. Um, and that didn't necessarily translate well in school. I didn't really, care to be friends with popular kids. I very much just kept to myself. So that kind of made me sort of an early on target for bullying. But, as the years went on, my mom started putting me into martial arts, which again made me a bigger target because, any kid who knows of another kid who knows martial arts, they always want to test you and see what you know and stuff.
I mean, I took martial arts too as a kid, so
yeah,
I can understand. Like, what discipline are you in?
When I was 8, my mom put me into karate. Since then, like I've done everything from like Taekwondo up into Wing Chun, a little bit of Filipino street fighting.
Nice.
Called Cali Ilustrismo. Some Krav Maga, like jiu-jitsu. I spent like 2 years doing. Did a little bit of wrestling and jiu-jitsu. When my mom threw me into karate, it basically like opened the floodgates. I fell in love with it and I just stuck with it. And I wanted to always try new things. Mm-hmm. I'm not necessarily married to one discipline, but I do have
sort of all over the place, and you want to immerse yourself into as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, and that especially became true when I started reading up on Bruce Lee and his whole philosophy of like, he was very revolutionary in the fact that he wanted to learn the best from everything, like taking all the best from multiple disciplines and just making them come into one.
I mean, that's partially why, like, I can only speak from my own personal experience. I was, like, I'm disabled, right? Mm-hmm. So, I use a walker and I've used several other things to move around. So, I mean, I can understand the whole being bullied and being thrown into, like, martial arts because my parents did the same for me. Actually, you know what? Let's get into your podcast because you mentioned here that you would compulsively lie and sort of make stuff up.
Yep.
I mean, is that? I suppose that's because you. I can only assume that that's because of the bullying and the fact that you're an introvert.
So, a lot of the choices I've made don't necessarily make sense to me. I'm in the process of kind of trying to answer that by seeking psychological help and really dedicating some time to self-reflection, and personal development, and all that. But my answer as of right now would have to be that all of the bullying I experienced, I internalized that as people did not like me, Marco Attanasi.
Right.
So why don't I try and be something else? And maybe they'll like that. So I would start to emulate, figures or people that I idolized.
So you look at their own lives and see something interesting about them and then sort of externalize that to everybody else?
Exactly, yeah. And that carried on long enough that it just became a really bad habit of mine. And it got to a point where last September, I just, I came to this realization, Leigh, that, eventually, like with blockchain, coming down the pipeline. Everyone's dirty laundry is just going to be out in the open. So I figured, this might be a nice exercise to kind of air this out myself as opposed to other people uncovering it.
Right.
And so I just started a podcast and started talking about everything I've lied about.
You know what? I commend you for that, because like, how many people would do that, right? How many people are comfortable with doing that? And like, why not? Like you said, I might as well, like your podcast is titled, Own the Truth. You might as well own the truth. You might as well own who you are. And what better way to basically record it and put it on the internet and basically in every single podcast app that there is out there? What's the feedback you're getting from your podcast? Because I've listened to a couple like bits and bobs of the episodes, and it's actually really interesting.
Yeah. In addition to me kind of owning my truth there, I also started talking about just kind of life and business insights that I keep inside my head. Because I'm also a mentor at the university that I graduated from. So I started kind of putting those little tidbits out there, and then I started interviewing other people, kind of like what you're doing now. But the feedback that I got was actually really positive from people that I used to go to school with. So I found that really interesting. And even the friends that I have now that I've been friends with for like over 10 years, I got really good feedback from them. So that's definitely a really nice thing. But at the same time, I was prepared for the negative feedback because I'm very much a believer in, doing what you want to do strictly because it's what you want to do. You're not doing it for somebody else or to candor to anybody else's point of view or whatnot.
You are a man after my own heart, good sir. But so you said that you were prepared for like the negative feedback. Were you were prepared for it, but was part of you like afraid that now that it's out in the open, like I'm going to get everything coming back at me now?
Oh no, I was hoping that the negative feedback would come because I'm really weird. Like when someone tells me not to do something, I know that I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah. If somebody
like
says can't, you say watch me.
Yeah, exactly. Or that hold my beer meme or whatever. I just, I am not the best person to look to for, the pinnacle of self-confidence, but I will say that it takes a certain level of self-confidence and self-esteem to, fully believe in your intuition and your gut feeling about certain things, and to just disregard what other people have to say about it, and to just move forward with that. That's something that I've learned very recently. So it's new for me, but it seems to be working.
Well, I suppose that's just part of getting older and the whole adulting thing. But what finally made you go, you know what, maybe I'm getting a bit too old to, I'm not going to say make stuff up or sort of like fantasize about things, but put up walls and say things about yourself that weren't true?
What made me get to that point?
Yeah, like how did you finally get there?
So last summer I took a trip to Italy with my girlfriend. It was a graduation present from my parents, and we were it was our last week in Italy, and we went for a whole month. And I was starting to get my brain back into like work mode, because I was, basically when we got back, I was going to start my new job at Noble, and things were going to really start to kick off for me. So I was like, okay, it's time to get back in the zone. So I was laying on a beach chair, as cliche as this is going to sound, but I had this realization that
it sounds amazing. The fact that you said I'm lying on a beach chair, I'm like, I want to be there right now.
See, it's funny because I really hate vacations, but we can talk about that another time.
Sure.
yeah, I was laying on a beach chair and I just had this thought that, you know, one day, everything that you've ever done, you know, people always like to say that they value privacy, but every time they unlock their phone, they, you know, prove otherwise. And I really think that it's just going to continue. Like, we will continue to value our privacy less and less for that convenience or for that perception of time saving. And you know, eventually I'll just be able to Google someone's name and see like every conversation they've ever had with, you know, some girl on Tinder that they were trying to get with or something.
It's
I
scary how
started
fast we're
reflecting on,
advancing.
yeah, yeah, and like I started reflecting on my own life, and I was just like, how are you maintaining these lies about myself? And I was like, you know what? Realistically, not very long. You know, even if it takes 10 years for that reality to, for that to become a reality, it's, you know, why wait? So I just decided, okay, I am going to do something about this. And I didn't immediately jump to, oh, I'll make a podcast. I at first thought that I was going to just straight up tell people, just face to face, but I thought that it was going to be a lot easier to just, you know, do it in a podcast format and have them all listen to it whenever they wanted to. So that is, I guess, the origin of Own the Truth.
I mean, well, that's cool that you finally got to the point where you're just like, you know what, it wasn't true, and there's nothing more that I can do now other than like basically embrace it, own it, and be comfortable with who I am and who I've become. So let's just put it all out there. And
yeah.
I'm assuming that most of the feedback you've gotten from your podcast is mostly positive, if not all positive.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard any negative feedback yet. I mean, the closest thing to negative feedback was that I heard somebody, like a good friend of mine, who I've been friends with since grade school. He said, you know what, I thought I was going to hate it, but I actually really like it. And it was mainly due to my voice. But
really?
Yeah, he's just straight up said, you know, I thought I was going to hate this, but it turns out it's actually.
Is there any like thing that, like any piece of advice that you would give to anybody going through the same thing that you've been going through, like the whether it's like being raised by a single mom, or, you know, the bullying, or even making up stories that aren't true?
It's a good question. And I've never really been asked that question before, which is why I'm taking so long to answer.
Take as much time as you need.
You know, what I would say is find, you know, all I know is what worked for me. And what worked for me was finding that one person that I could cling to, that I could air all of my dirty laundry up to. Before I started Own the Truth, my girlfriend was the person that I was telling all of my truths to.
Right.
She was the only person who really saw the real, authentic me. You know, when you start with just one person, it really makes it easier to, you know, start doing it with a second person, and then a third person, and, you know, just calling up a stranger, you know, and just jumping on their podcast and airing all your dirty laundry out. So
well, you're welcome. I mean, you know, I just want to get into like a little rapid fire here with you.
Yep.
Being a 90s kid myself, if there's anything you could bring back from the 90s, what would it be?
Metabots.
Really?
Yep.
I would have never guessed that.
It was a great show. It was a great show. I don't know where it went. I don't know why it died off. I would like to see it back.
Fair. I mean, there are a lot of shows that I remember as a kid, because I suppose I could consider myself lucky. We grew up with, like, the majority of my childhood, we had cable in my house, and like syndication was king.
Right.
So, like, for me, if they brought, I know they're planning on bringing back Animaniacs next year.
Yeah.
But, like, in my opinion, it should have never been canceled. And I mean, granted, I know this was a large purchase, and I just decided to go for it. But I found the entire
animated series on Amazon for like $65, and I'm like,
Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
it's a bit steep, but you know what? I love the show.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I was looking at my credit card bill that month, and I'm like, it's just whatever. I have it. Just enjoy it, you know?
Yeah, you only live once, right?
Is there any, like, have you seen any particularly good movies lately?
I saw Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Okay,
I thought
I've
it was
actually
a
never heard of it.
fantastic movie. Yeah, no, I never heard of it either. When I read the DVD, I saw it had something to do with like split personalities, and like I'm a big fan of like Split and that whole trilogy.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, cool. Like I'll have this. I'll give this a go. And for basically 2 hours straight, my girlfriend and I were just looking at each other the whole time, like, what is this movie and like what's going on? And yeah, the stuff that you'll find on the internet surrounding this movie like will consume days upon days of it. Like it's like one of those artsy kind of movies that like after watching 3 times you just don't know what it's about still.
It's a good excuse for me to become a hermit.
Yeah, if you're looking to kill a few days, watch that movie.
Well, so you mentioned you were at a gym.
Hmm?
So what's your go-to? What's on your gym playlist right now?
Ooh, gym playlist. It alternates every week because I get sick of songs very easily. Let's see. Right now we got some Justin Stone, a little bit of Drake, Bazanji, Roland. I'm not sure if any of these names are ringing a bell with you.
Other than Drake, I have no idea who any of these people are.
Yeah, I have a very particular taste in music. I love rap and hip hop that is based around storytelling. And
fair.
Like if an artist can convey, what happened to them, like this past year, or like how rough their childhood was, or like what it took for them to get here, or whatever the case is, I really dig that.
So yeah, it's kind of like started from the bottom. Now we're here. I understand why Drake's on your playlist now.
I don't really like that song in particular, but some of his recent songs, like his Scorpion album that came out, I really like that.
See, because I'm personally, like, I've spent time working in radio and media and things like that, but I personally like sit more within like things from the 70s, the 80s, and some of the 90s, but like that's right in my wheelhouse. So artists like Alice Cooper, or Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, things like I'll listen to that. When it comes to like hip hop, I'm into LL Cool J and like
right on.
So like a lot of the old stuff. Run DMC, they're one of my favorite groups. Yep. And like if I'm hitting the gym, I'm usually listening to like just some like heavy metal rock stuff. So like Aerosmith, or I love Fozzy. So and they're so they're one of my favorites as well. I mean that's cool.
You know what? Whatever gets the blood flowing is. I don't. It doesn't really matter to me if our tastes are a little different.
As long as we get along.
Yeah.
That's all you need. Like, doesn't matter what you listen to or what you watch, and what you do for a living. It's as long as you get along. I mean, that's all that matters. But Marco, I appreciate you coming on today. I like for this first run of a guest on the Beats and Speaks podcast. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the fact that you reached out and wanted to come on to the show. Again, you guys can check out Marco's podcast, Own the Truth, available everywhere. And if you're looking for some personal and self-help and development, I would go check that show out, because Marco, he's just an awesome guy, and I've talked to him just briefly here, and he just seems like a really down-to-earth, really honest guy. So Marco, thank you again. If you're on social media, where can they find you?
LinkedIn is my baby. You can just search my name on LinkedIn, and I'll be the first one to pop up.
All right,
Marco Attanasi. Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Marco Attanasi here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. Again, I have been your host, Leigh Dickey, and we will see you all next Friday at midnight Eastern time for a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast.
Well, there it is, my interview with Marco Attanasi. It was a fantastic day, a fantastic night. He was a great guy, real nice, loved having him on. He was so candid and so open about who he was, who he is, and what basically made him the man that he is today. So if you want to find Marco Attanasi, he is on LinkedIn. I will put that in the description below. And he does have this podcast called Own the Truth, where he basically goes in depth about why he told people the things that he did and why he basically presented that as fact when in true form they weren't true. They were not fact. So I will put that in the description as well. That podcast, his podcast, Marco's podcast, Own the Truth, is available on your favorite podcatcher app. So iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, you name it, it's probably there. So that concludes, I should say, this episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. Thanks again for tuning in and listening. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Of course, you can find the Beats and Speaks podcast on iTunes, Spotify, my official website, LeighTDickey.com. New episodes are released every Friday at midnight Eastern Time. And if you'd like to tell your story, if you'd like to shoot the breeze with me, and you'd like to be a guest on the Beats and Speaks podcast, shoot me an email at leightdickey@gmail.com. That's LEIGHTDICKEY@gmail.com. But this concludes this week's episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. We will see you all and talk to you all next Friday at midnight Eastern Time for a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. I've been your host, Leigh Dickey, and I'm signing off. We'll talk to you all soon. Hope you have a good one. Take care. Peace out. See ya. LeighTDickey